everyone, and welcome to Church Coffee, Christianity, Conservatism, and Culture. I'm a host, Rob, and today we're joined with my co-host, Walter, and Warren Cole Smith. Mr. Smith is the president of Ministry Watch, and prior to that, Warren was the vice president, mission achievement for the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. Today, we invite Mr. Warren on to talk about Megan Basham of the Daily Wire, her new book, Shepherds for Sale. I really enjoyed Warren's review on the Dispatch. We'll link that in the show notes below. But first and foremost, Warren, thanks to you so much for being able to come on and taking time out of your busy schedule to talk about this book.
Yeah, Rob, Walter, thank you so much for having me on the program. I'll try not to mess it up.
All good.
We'll give you a first real easy softball question. How do you take your coffee? What's your favorite coffee or any sort of caffeinated beverage you have?
Yeah, I take my coffee hot and black. I rarely, if the coffee's really bad, I might put some cream in it. Never sugar, never sweet and low for me. But yeah, and usually stronger the better is I pretty much drink coffee all day long. In fact, after dinner, I'll usually make a small pot of decaf coffee. So I am highly caffeinated.
That's awesome. Real quick on black coffee. My wife has told me we need to cut back our coffee budget because I like buying a local roaster called Island Coffee. Fantastic, good stuff here in Dallas, Texas. They're not a show sponsor, but I've had to downgrade my coffee to Poro Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts. And I like my coffee black, so I need my coffee to have some good flavor to it. But I live a humble life sometimes.
Yeah. Well, your palate.
Walter and I have 7 kids between us. I have 3, he has 4, and that is one of the few things I'm not going to compromise on my budget is the amount of good coffee. There's a lot of things I've compromised in my parenting, which is what you're supposed to do, but I think good coffee is one of the few luxuries in life you should not dial back on. So Walter, you have my back if you need Talia, if you need us to take on your wife.
Well, you guys have a much more sophisticated palate than I do. Like I say, my two primary requirements are black and hot. After that, it can be good, bad, or indifferent. Though I don't hate I'm not a Starbucks hater, and I actually really like Dunkin' Donuts coffee. So, yeah.
All right, that's my question. Warren, so what is your story, and can you tell us a little bit about Ministry Watch?
I sure can. Yeah, I'm a lot older than you guys are, so I'm not going to tell you my whole story.
I thought you're about 45.
We'd be here all day long. But in that, I'll start with Ministry Watch. I'm the president of Ministry Watch. The Ministry Watch does financial analysis and investigative or enterprise journalism related to Christian ministries. The mission of Ministry Watch is to serve donors, not necessarily to serve the ministries themselves, even though we hope that that's a byproduct. Our goal is to give donors the information that they need in order to be wise stewards of the resources that God has entrusted to them. So we have a rating system on our website, ministrywatch.com. We rate the 1,000 largest Christian ministries in the country. And we do what I would call beat journalism, which is just basic news, just following the ministry space. And, this big ministry has a new president, or, this organization did this or that. But we also, like I say, do enterprise or investigative journalism, where we will, if we see problems in a ministry, we will try to ferret those problems out and write about them here at Ministry Watch.
Yeah. I used to work before I got into home building. I used to work for InterVarsity Fellowship USA for 7. I worked for them for 6 years. Warren, would you give us a little bit of time with give us a little bit of information about your time at World, being that we're listening to your review about Mrs. Basham's book, being that I think she used to work there. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in fact, I helped bring her to World. I mean, I wasn't the person that actually hired her by any stretch of the imagination, but yeah. Well, the last 5 years I've been here at Ministry Watch. Before that, I was at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, and helped. I was the vice president of mission advancement there, as I think Rob, you mentioned in my bio, and then before that was when I was at World, and I was the vice president and associate publisher at World Magazine. But I wore several hats, one of which was that I did serve on the editorial team and did a lot of writing, some very little editing. Mostly I was a writer and a reporter when I was at World. And I had met Megan Basham because we were both covering the same event. Megan was a freelance movie reviewer, and occasionally I would go on these movie junkets to Los Angeles, to Hollywood, where the studios would fly you out, you'd screen the movie, they give you an opportunity to, interview some of the stars or maybe the director or the producer or whatever. And so I met Megan on a junket and, was impressed with her. And now fast forward, I don't remember how long, but some period of time, I went on another press junket to India. And the guy that was organizing that press junket was he had a dropout at the last minute, and he called me kind of in a panic saying, hey, we're leaving for India for 10 days in 3 weeks. And I've got a couple of spots that I still need to fill. You got any suggestions? So I suggested Megan for that trip. And so Megan and I and probably 4 or 5 other journalists went on that trip to India. So I think we probably spent about 10 days together on that trip. And one of the other reporters on that trip was someone named Jamie Dean, who was with World Magazine. And it was actually Jamie that probably did the key recommendation for Megan to go to work for World. But Megan ended up started out writing movie reviews and ultimately was the culture editor at World. And I was there for some of that time. I left. I've been gone from World Magazine now for 9 years. So it's and she was started right about the time I left. But we stayed in touch over the years, and in fact, I've got a picture of the two of us together on a panel as a panel discussion about 3 years ago. So yeah, I had a lot of admiration for Megan. I thought she was doing good work at World, especially as she was as a movie reviewer. She didn't have a lot of experience as a reporter, and I think some of that shows up in this new book, Shepherds for Sale.
Yeah, could you give us a general hypothesis and overview of Miss Basham's book?
Yeah, it's I want to be careful because I didn't. Megan wrote the book, not me, of course. But I don't want to misrepresent the book, but I think it's fair to say, before I get into my criticisms of the book, that what she is attempting to do is to highlight pastors and other Christian ministry leaders that she believes have been swayed or bought out, sold. I mean, that's the whole title, the premise of the book, Shepherds for Sale, by progressive and leftist causes. And she names a lot of names. Russell Moore would be one, of Christianity Today. She talks a lot about Christianity Today. David French would be another. Francis Collins, who was one of the founders of BioLogos, which is a Christian organization that deals with science and reason. The list just goes on and on. In fact, I put together a document where I identified the people that she attacks, a partial list: Rick Warren, Brett McCracken of the Gospel Coalition, Ed Stetzer, J.D. Greer, former president of the Southern Baptist Convention, Russell Moore, Tim Dalrymple, Beth Moore, Tim Keller, Marvin Olasky, the former editor of World, Karen Swallow Pryor, Cherie Harder of the Trinity Forum, Colin Hansen, also of the Gospel Coalition, Gavin Ortlund, N.T. Wright. I'm going to stop there just because I think you kind of get the picture. Right. These are all people that she attacked. There are some heroes in the book. And, one of them is a guy named Cal Beisner. Calvin Beisner is with an organization called the Cornwall Alliance, and they deal mostly with climate change. And I like Cal. I've known Cal for 15 or 20 years. In fact, I wrote a series of articles on climate change for the Stream about 5 years ago, Cal saw that series of articles that I wrote for the Stream, and they published it as a booklet. So I'm a fan of the Cornwall Alliance, and so and for me one of the ironies of Megan's book is that I agree with her on many of the individual issues that she writes about. I think that climate change catastrophists, if I could put them that way, have overblown this issue. I think that that the federal government and others have a lot to answer for the way they handled the COVID-19 crisis in this country. But let me say this,
not just would probably have pretty overlapping criticisms of big government, but also teachers unions would be another
oh yeah,
point of
absolutely.
contention. I just say that to be there are public and private groups that
but I do want to make this
probably
point.
Not get their due diligence for COVID restrictions.
Yeah, she undermines her case in two ways. Number one is that there's just a ton of factual errors there, and so you can't use lies to tell the truth. And so even if the point you're trying to make is true, you undermine the truth of the point that you're trying to make if you don't come up with factual, realistic points to support that. And that's essentially what she's done here. There's just so many factual errors that it's hard to take the argument seriously, even if you agree with them. And from my point of view, I also know a lot of these people. I mean, every name that I just read to you, N.T. Wright, Tim Keller, Russell Moore, the list just goes on and on. The J.D. Greear, I have either met them or in most cases, J.D. Greear, Russell Moore, and others, I've actually interviewed them. I've spent extended periods of time interviewing them and asking them tough questions. And
or even Martin Olasky. I mean, I'm sure you guys worked hand in hand. But you were
I wrote a book with Marvin Olasky. I mean, Marvin and I have known each other for nearly 30 years. And that's one of the things that I say in the introduction to my article for the Dispatch that you mentioned earlier, Rob, is that I know these people and I don't love them all. I mean, I think I've written some things recently that are fairly critical of David French, for example. And Francis Collins, I wrote a very tough article about BioLogos for World Magazine 10 years ago. And so I'm very aware of some of the shortcomings and flaws and inadequacies of some of the people that she criticizes. But I did not recognize those people based on Megan's descriptions in her book. There were things that were just made up, that were fabricated. There were facts that were just wrong, that were presented in order to make a point. And that was why I felt compelled to write the article that I did for the Dispatch.
We will pause for a sponsor break from Handy Mike and Genesis Contracting. Handy Mike and Genesis are a locally owned and family-operated handyman and contractor company serving the greater Charlottesville area since 2016. They are a Class A licensed, bonded, and insured contractor with over 60 years of knowledge. Their teams of skilled, reliable, and trustworthy technicians have been handpicked in order to provide our customers with outstanding service across a broad range of tradesman skills. Handy Mike can do all of your home maintenance repairs and small projects, from changing a light bulb to deck repairs to electrical and plumbing fixtures, and so much more. Genesis Contracting can handle larger jobs, including bathroom and kitchen renovations, remodels, and additions. If you're looking for a team to help make your dreams a reality and bring your concept to creation, call them today for a free estimate. 434-422-6000. You can also find more of their information in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
Great overview. Let's dig into it a little bit more. You already highlighted some positives, but can you dive a little bit deeper in your review for the Dispatch? You highlight Sam James's review about Basham taking on the all too simplified narrative of immigration or climate change or Church 2 problems. I saw yesterday on Twitter you highlighted Neil Shevney's review. He especially thinks Basham does a good job on big EVA controversies. Can you kind of walk us through some of the points that you thought that she did a good job on?
Yeah, well, and I think you've identified most of them right there. Is that I think that that the climate change chapter is there's a lot to commend that chapter. One of the things that I think she gets wrong about that, though, is that she tries to elevate that to a gospel issue, and it's just not. And the other thing too is that she takes comments of people like Gavin Ortland just completely out of context to try to paint him as someone who himself has elevated climate change to a gospel issue, which he explicitly says it's not. It's a second order issue or even a third order issue. But Megan tries to make it sound like Gavin Ortland has elevated that issue to a first order issue. And furthermore, the issue is if let's say even if Gavin is wrong, did he arrive at that conclusion based on the fact that he was, received money from George Soros or the Open Society Foundation? And the answer to that
Or
question is,
Extinction Rebellion or something
or
like that.
yeah, or whatever. And the answer to that question is an unequivocal no, absolutely not. I mean, if so, the notion that Gavin Ortland or David French or Russell Moore or J.D. Greer, setting aside what you might think about them and their positions, the notion that they were bought off by liberal foundations and billionaires is just absolutely false. There's just no evidence to suggest that whatsoever. And furthermore, and this is one of the things that I say in my dispatch review, if anybody's being bought off right now, it's the populist right, not the progressive left. That's where all the big money is right now in evangelicalism. You look at the publication that Megan herself writes for, the Daily Wire. I don't know the numbers, but I have heard that those numbers are at least in the tens of millions of dollars that organization has received. So
Well,
you look at Turning Point
they're
USA does
well, the
$80
Daily
million a year in income. So that's where the money is right now. I mean, if anybody's
well,
being
Daily
bought
Wire
off, it's the
Plus.
people right.
Daily Wire Plus alone has 1.2 million subscribers, and that's like 18-20 bucks a month. So I think Daily Wire is earning a lot more money than just tens of millions of dollars a year. I think they're earning hundreds of millions of dollars a month just based off that price range alone.
That could well be. And so yeah, so exactly right. So that's my point, is that the money is on the populist right, not on the progressive left. And once again, I'm a conservative. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-traditional family. I mean, I believe that border security is an issue. I believe that climate change hysteria is overblown, and that these are real issues. But again, you don't tell the truth by telling lies. The end does not justify the means. Just because you're serving some greater good or what you think might be some greater truth, you can't use lies to get there. That is just not allowable for the Christian who is bound by the ninth commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness. But it's also just not a great rhetorical strategy. You undermine your own credibility with the people that you're trying to convince.
Yeah. Well, you've obviously pushed that point already, in much of Miss Basham's book has been questioned, especially online. That my Twitter feed seems to be the last 10 days or more just bullet points after bullet points after bullet points. What
Yeah,
were
mine too. It's good if you imagine if you were tagged in those.
yeah, seriously. You've already mentioned Christianity Today and Warren Moore and Marvin Olasky and World Magazine, Francis Collins. Why don't can you give us some of the specific examples Ms. Basham walks through about some of those people, or just some of the people you've made even a list about that you find problematic at the very least?
Yeah, well, one of the ones that struck me right away was, and this is not one that we've talked about so far, but the Trinity Forum is mentioned very near the beginning of the book. Os Guinness founded the Trinity Forum, and I know Os. I've been friends with Os for many years. I've interviewed him on my podcast and written stories in which I've quoted him in the past. And when I read the section about the Trinity Forum, basically Megan Basham says that and in that section that under Oz, the Trinity Forum was sort of following the straight and narrow of the conservative orthodoxy. But when Cherie Harder took over the Trinity Forum, it took a left turn. And that the reason it took a left turn was because of funding. And she quotes Oz in the book, sort of making that point about Cherie Harder. Well, I was like, that just doesn't sound like Oz. I've known Oz for, like I say, for at least 10 years, maybe 15 or 20 years. So, because I know him, I called him. I've got his phone number, I got his email. I called him and said, hey, Oz, this is what Megan Basham said about you in the book. And Oz confirmed to me, well, I did say those words, but it was not about the Trinity Forum. That she used the words that I said about Christians who don't vote, and she misapplied them. She took them completely out of context and applied them to the Trinity Forum. In fact, Oz's words were, that is absolutely wrong. And Cherie Harder herself, who I think in that, as a journalist, if that were the case, in other words, if I really did have Oz Guinness on the record criticizing Cherie Harder, which of course now we know that didn't happen, but if she did, I think she owed Cherie Harder an opportunity to respond to that. And so I know Cherie, so I called Cherie, and she said that I've never met or talked with Megan Basham. She did not interview me or attempt to do so before writing about me or the Trinity Forum. And Cherie Harder goes on to say, the book is not accurate, not an accurate representation of me or the Trinity Forum. There are factual errors, large and small. And then there's one story that I won't get into, Rob, today, but a story about Larry Taunton, that Larry Alex Taunton, that she writes about, that, but that also relates to the Trinity Forum a little bit. And she says that story is absolutely absurd. So I mean, that's just one organization, one example. And the situation with Marvin Olasky in World Magazine, in my opinion, is even more egregious, because she basically accused Marvin of changing his position on the pro-life issue. Marvin Olasky is in his 70s, and he has been an avid, a public, effective pro-life spokesman for at least the last 40 years of his life. I mean, he's written hundreds of articles about the pro-life issue from a pro-life perspective. He's written at least 3 books that I know of that specifically deal with the life issue. He's made the pro-life issue a pillar of the coverage that World Magazine has done. And yet, Megan takes some comments completely out of context with Marvin to paint him as somebody who has shifted his position on the life issue. It's just factually not accurate. It just is wrong. And, Marvin has said so publicly since the book has come out. He said so to me on the record, and I quoted him in my article.
Yeah. So with all that happening, the missummarizing, does that open her and or HarperCollins up to any legal troubles?
Yeah, that's a great question, Walter. I'm I'm not a lawyer, and I don't play one on TV or Zoom. So I'm not gonna speculate about that. I'll say 2 or 3 things, though, that maybe Walter won't completely satisfy you, because it's not a direct answer to your question, but I think it's as far as I'm willing to go. Number
Understood.
one is that it is, I've written more than a dozen books myself. The fact-checking process for every book that I've done, I mean, I've written 1 novel, so there wasn't a lot of fact-checking on the novel, but the nonfiction books, I mean, it's a convoluted and painful process. I mean, I've gotten dozens and dozens of pages back from editors saying, you need an attribution here. Is this a direct quote or not? If it's a direct quote, you need to put it in quotation marks and attribute it. And if it's not a direct quote, we need to be clearer that you're paraphrasing and that whatever. So the fact checking process for most nonfiction books is rigorous. It is just based on the number of facts that I was able to uncover personally. in my read through. Now, as Rob, you've mentioned already, lots of other people have come on board too. Neil Chevney and Samuel James and others have written
Ben, Ben, Ben Marsh, I think you linked it in the dispatch. He's got an ongoing thread of like,
yeah.
this is
So I
wrong,
mean,
this is wrong. It looks like she's maybe has plagiarized Wikipedia. Like there are like
yeah,
direct
Janet
quotes to
Mefford has
quotes on that.
speculated that she may have. I'm not gonna. I haven't read closely those passages, so I don't want to. I want to be careful that I don't say that. But again, back to the fact checking. My point is, none of us are professional fact checkers, right? We're just reading the book and we're looking. This doesn't sound right, and then you do a quick Google search and you find out it's not right, and so I do think HarperCollins bears a tremendous weight of responsibility here, and I do think that they really dropped the ball. I mean, I don't know what kind of it does not appear to me that any serious level of fact checking at the publisher editor level took place, and if it did, that fact checker, that editor should probably be fired. Now, the next question or a related question, Walter, that you asked is about legal liability. I will have to say that I've been I write a lot of stories, and sometimes people don't like what I write, and I've been threatened with lawsuits in my journalism career, and I have been sued in my journalism career. Fortunately, that suit settled without me having to pay any money or retract any of my stories. But my point is that stuff does happen. And I would say, though, that as someone who has been sued or threatened with lawsuits, the First Amendment is a really good defense for journalists. It's not clear to me, especially if it's an opinion piece. The thing about Megan's book, though, is that she asserts over and over and over again that it's a work of journalism, that it is not a work of opinion. And I think from a legal point of view, she would be much better off if she said that, this is long form essay opinion journalism. But she keeps saying, I've got the receipts. That's one of the that's one of her favorite expressions that she's responded to when she says that people have denied that she said something. She'll say, I've got the receipts. Well, in fact, if she doesn't, A, she doesn't have the receipts, but B, again, she keeps representing this as a work of journalism. So I think that does put her in a slightly weaker legal position. The other thing too is that the people that she has wronged are for the most part, again, whether you agree or disagree with them, they're people of high integrity, and most of them are deeply committed Christians. So all of them that I know about. And they're very aware of the biblical admonition not to sue another Christian brother or sister, and except under extraordinary circumstances. So I know I've talked to some of them, and they've thought about suing for slander, but so far they have decided not to do that. I think a more realistic, and the other thing that I'll say too is if HarperCollins, I mean, that book made the New York Times bestseller list last week. I don't know whether it's on the list this week or not, but
I can only imagine it might have even climbed because controversy does breed, at least in the short term, sales. Like you want to see what's up, right?
Yeah. So I don't know though. I haven't looked yet, but my point is because of that, let's say you're right, Rob, and it even climbs. But I mean, HarperCollins is in a tough spot right now. I mean, if they pull that book, it's going to cost them a lot of money. And the other thing too is that people on the other side will start screaming then, that what I'm sure I can hear it right now. Woke culture, canceled Megan Basham. And so she becomes a hero, all over again for the populist right. So I don't envy HarperCollins' position right now. If they came to me, and I mean, and trust me, they have not come to me and asked for my advice, but if they did, what I would do is, I mean, I'm sure that even a book on the New York Times bestseller list, they didn't print 1 million copies of that book and they're sitting in a warehouse somewhere in New Jersey. They probably printed. It's almost a print on demand situation these days with a lot of books. I mean, they might have printed 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 at the most, I would think. And because they can, they can turn the switch on and print 20,000 more pretty quickly if they need to. So my recommendation to them would be, don't retract the book, but do the fact check that you should have done in the beginning, revise the book and reissue it. If you do a second printing, correct the errors in it. I don't think that's the perfect solution, because I think some of the problem with the book is a problem of the fundamental premise of the book, which is that these pastors have changed their position because of money. I mean, that's what the very title suggests. And I think that is not only unprovable, but probably verifiably false. And that's something that can't be fixed. But at least some of the basic factual errors. I mean, identified two pastors, for example, as being graduates of PCA seminaries when they in fact are not graduates of PCA seminaries. That's a minor error, but it is an error that is so easy to verify and check that it's just kind of an indication of the level of problem that there is in the book.
Yeah, I think she said that Wes Hill was a graduate of a PCA seminary, and he is definitively not.
Right, exactly.
Or for maybe someone who might not know who Wes Hill is a side B Christian. That typically means he's a Christian who has homosexual leanings, who's same-sex attracted, but has decided to lead a life of celibacy. That's someone who's very open about that and explores in his writing what it means to be a Christian who is homosexual, a Christian who's SSA, but also who has felt that within that life, that he cannot lead that lifestyle in whatever way that might be affirming. Therefore, he's chosen celibacy, which I think is a very it's a harder life than I would ever want to live. And I think for all of problems I also have with Wes Hill, I think that type of, for lack of a better term, open kind of lifestyle ministry is lost for a lot of the church and certainly a lot of society today. I'm the next question. We have not said the big guy's name yet, but does Donald Trump and his wider base are they framed at all in the book? I ask because even if all the evidence that we've talked about, especially in negative light throughout this podcast, it was actually true, what about the political and spiritual, quite frankly, malfeasance of Donald Trump mean for the book? Daily Wire especially is not very veiled on their liking of Donald Trump. So I just wondered if he's a hero in the book, if he's more of a background figure. Where does he play in this?
Yeah, he's definitely not a background figure. I looked in the index of the book, and he's probably not the person mentioned most in the book, because most of the book is dedicated to the bad, what the book identifies as the bad guys in the book. So, you probably someone like Russell Moore or David French would be mentioned more times than Donald Trump. But among the very few people that are mentioned in a positive light, I think it's fair to say that Donald Trump is mentioned the most. So most of the folks in the book are mentioned negatively. A few are mentioned positively, like Calvin Beisner, for example, that I mentioned earlier. But Donald Trump is mentioned. I'm doing this from memory, but my recollection is in far in excess of 30 times, somewhere between 30 and 50 times, Donald Trump is mentioned, and they're virtually all positive or defending Donald Trump in some way against one of the detractors. So I'm not willing. I want to be careful about assigning motive to someone. I don't know why that people do things, but just looking at the sheer text of the book itself, that Donald Trump is clearly one of very, very few people who are mentioned positively, and he is mentioned more positively than any other person. And the people who are mentioned negatively are often mentioned negatively in the context of their opposition to Trump in some way. So a lot of what the sort of the narrative arc of the book is that You got a bunch of bad guys, and one of the reasons they are bad is that they oppose Donald Trump. There might be other reasons, there might be other motives like money, but certainly Donald Trump is a more than just a shadow figure in this book. He's mentioned throughout from beginning to end.
Yeah, I will. My dad has voted for Donald Trump twice. Will vote again. He's not someone that I would say is MAGA, but something that I've told him a few times. I didn't vote for Obama. I voted for John McCain and Mitt Romney. But something I told my dad was, I don't think even a black guy on the left could get president twice over if he had 5 children with 3 different women. I think there's a weird disconnect there, that being one of the primary ones for me, in that Donald Trump has been divorced twice. He's, like I said, he's had 5 children with 3 different women. The fact that Barack Obama, for many policies that I did not enjoy about his 2 terms as president, seemed to very much have a loving and steadfast and long-term marriage, and that's something that I can at least respect, and that's something I cannot, quite frankly, respect about Donald Trump. And I think David French has a good way forward, is that you should first, especially as a Christian, look to someone's character and then look to their political ideology, political bent, what they want to put forward. David French also, there are good criticisms of David French. Although I still think David French is more principled than perhaps some people that are still label themselves conservative or even evangelical. That's just that would just be me. I'll hand it over to Walter for the next
Okay, so
question.
so I think this is one of those questions where but anyway, all this to say is, how should Christians respond to the book? And I think you can even add this in. Okay, you have a book. It was written. There's a lot of things in there that there are things in there that are not true. And I'm going based off of your review of the book. I want to buy the book and I want to read it, but I would rather kind of borrow it from somebody. But I might just have to buy it just so I can read it for myself. But and how do we respond to these things? Like if someone's putting out misinformation or someone's saying something and it's not true, but this is very public, right? This is on a national scale. How do Christians respond even farther, and even on a larger scale? How do we call it falsehoods or corrections or maybe even straight up lies? Right?
Yeah, these are great questions, and they are. And I don't have sound bites for you. I would simply say that we live in an age right now where media consumption is at an all-time high, and media literacy is at an all-time low, and in many ways. And that sounds like, counterintuitive or even contradictory, but I don't think it is. I think that because we're so immersed in media these days that we have forgotten how to use wisdom, discernment, judgment in the way we consume media. And I think questions that we should be asking of all media, whether it's Ministry Watch, my website, or Megan Basham's book, or David French's column in the New York Times, or whatever it is, the questions that we all kind of used to intuitively know that we would ask of media, we've just forgotten how to ask those questions, or we've forgotten that we're supposed to ask those questions. And what do I mean by that? I mean questions like, what is this story or this podcast or this film or this newscast leaving out? In other words, every word of a 90-second news story on NPR might be factually accurate, and it might also be telling you a big fat lie because of all the things that it is leaving out. So when I teach media literacy to high school and college age kids, which I do from time to time, I will say, you need to, every time you see a news story, you need to ask, what are they leaving out? And a related question is, whose perspective are they leaving out? One of the things that, and this is what Megan did, and this is what you see a lot on, especially on the liberal media, is that let's just take an issue like abortion. Just because I can't think of anything else right now. That if a liberal pro-abortion or pro-choice, however you want to call it, news outlet is reporting that story, they know 1,000 people that are pro-choice because that's the bubble they live in. The liberal media lives in basically a pro-choice bubble. So they can fine tune the sources for that story. They might be able to find the most reasonable voice for a particular pro-choice point of view that they want to promote. But then whenever they say, oh, well, okay, I'm a journalist and it's fair, I got to go find a pro-life position. Who are they going to find on the pro-life side? They're going to find a nut. They're going to find the Fred Phelps, guy, or the kind of the way, I call them. In fact, I call that practice nut picking, where the liberal media, and I'm just using this as an example here. The liberal media will have reasonable liberal voices and unreasonable conservative voices in their stories. And even though they both, at the end of the day, it looks like, wow, this is a pro-choice voice and a pro-life voice. But in reality, that whole game has been rigged based on the sources that they had. So what are they leaving out? Whose perspective are they leaving out is a really important part of what it means to be media literate. The other thing that I think we need to pay attention to in this era of social media is the medium even appropriate? I mean, Rob, we've mentioned social media as it relates to Megan's book, but this book is being basically litigated in 140 and 280 character sound bites. And that is just not the best way to have a discussion about really important issues. And I think that that's a big problem with the sort of the cultural conversation that we're having right now, is that you just can't have it effectively and appropriately in the using the current media tools and media landscape that we have. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're in such a bad spot in terms of civic dialogue these days.
Yeah, very, very unfortunate. Final question for you, Warren. Thank you so much for joining us so far. What do you see as, I guess, a way forward, both politically and spiritually, for what I would term as Reaganite evangelical? I think the last time I can remember someone that I would consider both a strong moral voice and a good political conservative that I voted for highest office would probably be Mitt Romney. I know he's Mormon. I do not agree with Mormonism whatsoever, but he is someone that, especially over the last 12 years, has shown he has a strong moral core that is somewhat conservative, that he has a good conservative ideology, and someone that has stuck to that even in politically changing times. Reaganite evangelical, someone who might be traditionally conservative type deal. With Walter and I have both felt pretty politically homeless. I know a lot of even liberals who feel pretty politically homeless these days. What do you see as a way forward for the conservative Christian who doesn't feel accepted by the Trump wing of the Republican Party, but can't stomach going to Democrats?
Yeah, that's a great question. And once again, I don't have a definitive, 25-word answer for that, Rob, that's going to satisfy everybody. But let me just mention a couple of things. Number one, I think that this feeling you have of being politically homeless is, I get it. It's very real. I feel the same way. I haven't voted for either major party candidate in probably at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 election cycles. I don't even remember the last time I voted for one of the major party candidates for president. So I get that feeling of homelessness, but I think the thing that I would emphasize is, for the Christian, we all live east of Eden now. And that is as it has ever been. And that I think that one of the reasons that feeling of homelessness feels so uncomfortable is that is that we have forgotten that that's who we are, that we're a pilgrim people, that that we are not going to feel at home in this world completely. And yet we've kind of convinced ourselves that we should. And that and I think that is diametrically opposed to what the Bible teaches. I mean, that, you know, as the old spiritual goes, you know, I am a pilgrim and a stranger, a traveling through this wearisome land, but I've got a home in that yonder city, good Lord, and it's not made by hand, right? I mean, that I not trying to get all revivalist on you, but I
Hey,
mean,
go preach if you got to preach.
but you know, I think we've just got to understand, we've got to reacquaint ourselves with the notion that you know, if we're looking to politics, if we're looking to civic institutions to you know, build the kingdom that God said is coming, I just think that that's a mistake. I think that's a big mistake. I think it is not what the Bible teaches. In fact, I think it's diametrically opposed to what the Bible teaches. And I don't care if somebody calls themselves a Christian or not. If that's what they're teaching and that's what they're believing, then that's not a Christian teaching. And so I think that we need to get, you know, familiar. We need to sort of come back and reacquaint ourselves with that what I would call a biblical anthropology, right? A biblical understanding of man and who we are, and it just doesn't include some of the things that we see in populist politics these days. The other thing that I think we need to do is, you know, I've not done a word study of this myself, but I've been told that the most common command in Scripture is "fear not" or "be not afraid." Or some version of that, and it is obvious to me that a lot of populist politics today is driven by fear. That a lot of the folks like Megan Basham, I'm sad to say, because like I say, for many years I called her a friend, they are what I have heard called conflict entrepreneurs. They are trying to pit us against each other. They're trying to generate fear of someone who is not of my race, someone who is not from my country, the, you know, illegal alien, 12 million illegal aliens in this country, you know, on and on and on. They're trying to generate fear. And listen, I'm not saying that we don't have big problems in this country. We absolutely do. But when we start making our fundamental decisions as human beings, as individuals, especially as Christians, when we start making those decisions based on fear and not based on love, we have departed the path of the gospel. And I think that it's really important that we keep that in mind. And I think fear and conflict entrepreneurs are you know, have found their way into the evangelical world, and that's who and what they are and who and what we become. The other thing that I would just say, you know, related to that is that most people can tell you who the president of the United States is, right? Or who the candidates for president of the United States. A whole lot of people can't tell you the name of their mayor, can't tell you the name of their city councilman, they can't tell you the name of their county commissioner. And, you know, I would just like to suggest to a lot of our listeners right now that if you're serious about making a difference, if you're, you know, not just talk about making a difference, get involved at the local level, right? Get involved in your local pregnancy care center. Get involved in a candidate that you really believe in at the local level. The likelihood that any of the three of us are going to make a meaningful difference in Washington, D.C. is infinitesimally small. But I have personally seen a very, very small number of people, even down to just one individual, make a big difference in small towns and counties and cities and school boards all across this country. And I think that that's one of the things that you know, that as Christians we need to understand, that you know, God calls us to be faithful right where we are, and to leave the results up to Him. You know, we can't do the end does not justify the means. You can't use lies in service of a greater truth. And this being faithful to where God has called you and to what God has called you to do, I think is a lost skill for the church that we need to recover.
That's a good
Yeah,
word.
I've been reading through Proverbs recently. I think that your fear line has a other side of the coin. You shall not fear what's going on around you, but you should fear the Lord.
Fear God. Yep.
Yes. And the other thing I would say is, this is a drumbeat I try to get on, is if you Google your town or your county and then add in boards and commissions, guaranteed there are openings on probably some important boards, school boards, civilian oversight boards for police, historical architecture review boards. There are always, these are volunteer basis, but you punch above your weight, because 9 times out of 10, when you push this program up to city council or board of supervisors or whatever it's called in your area, they're going to rubber stamp it. I mean, they might change something in there, the language, but otherwise you can punch very, very much above your weight in local politics. That will help your community in many other ways. That, or yeah, local pregnancy center. Walter and I just interviewed Abundant Life Ministries here in Charlottesville about vocational trades and just tutoring. Like, the amount of schooling that needs to happen in our public schools, he said they only need one tutor 1 hour a week to make sure a kid can get out of high school. And that'll open doors that kid's parents might not have even seen.
Well, and by the way, that is thoroughly biblical, right? I mean, whenever the people of Israel were in Babylonian captivity, I mean, that is what God called the people to do, to work for the flourishing of the cities in which they lived. So it's this is not a woke solution. This is a thoroughly biblical solution that has an impact on the community, enhances the witness of the individual Christian, but also of Christianity generally in those communities, and also has a real chance of actually making a difference.
And that's a great way to end it. Warren Cole Smith of Ministry Watch, thank you so much for coming on Church Coffee.
Thanks,
And we'll again put your review below, but you've covered all of it and more right here. And if we need your advice on any other ministry opportunities, we'll cue you in.
I appreciate that. This has been a fun conversation, guys. Thank you so much for having me on.
Our album art was done by my wife, and our theme music was composed by TJ Stokes.